I'm all for you doing whatever you want in any capacity, as long as it does not tank a healthy relationship with work, family, spirituality, and self.
Hello, I'm Mish, and I invite you in today to be inspired, invigorated, and nourished. This podcast, in her own way, is for women who are ready to empower themselves to live an aligned life that is unapologetic, rich, and radiant. An open discussion that is transparent about the struggles, tips, and stories of women who have come to live in their own truth, power, and sense of self. I'm absolutely thrilled that you're here and with me on this journey.
So, 3.5 years ago, I started my entrepreneurship journey. Actually, that's not even 100% true. I think I started my entrepreneurship journey somewhere probably in middle school when I started selling candy during the morning recess. And it kind of catapulted or evolved into a lot of volunteering activities in high school and also in college. And after I had my daughter in 2015, I started my first business in a network marketing company. And the first year of it was great until it all kind of consumed my life. And I'm not fundamentally against network marketing companies, but what I am against, even in just life in general or in the entrepreneurship world, is the glorification of hustle, the glorification of burnout, and almost this glorification of, I need to take time out, and I'm taking time out, look at me, I'm so amazing. Now, there's always parts of it where, yes, you can work towards something and you can say, I'm intentionally taking some time off. What has happened is we've gotten into this conversation, especially in the online world, of hustle babe, boss babe, you're such a babe, kind of this babe-alicious culture. And this hustle mentality that I think is really very, very damaging for women. And I also think it's incredibly damaging for families. So I know that some of you right now are going to turn this podcast off and throw your iPhone or your iPad across the lake if you're walking around one. But I'm actually going to stand really firmly on that, and I'll tell you why. What I think is happening in this kind of hustle mentality is that what we're creating is a culture of entrepreneurs, or let's just women in general, who are hustling for something much deeper than what they're actually doing. I'm all for women creating a career or a lifestyle that fits them 100%. But what I have so often seen, and from myself, is that it is at the expense of true health and belonging and boundaries, healthy relationships with their partners and their children, healthy relationships with themselves, and also a healthy work-life balance. That's when I say, I'm all for you doing whatever you want in any capacity, as long as it does not tank a healthy relationship with work, family, spirituality, and self. Full stop. And the conversation then becomes, what does that look like? Because we don't talk about what does a healthy relationship in a holistic sense look like when we are talking about entrepreneurship. I haven't seen a lot of it. I've seen of it like slow down, prioritize, get more organized, create systems so that you can do more, be more. But not because it's about the end goal of you actually creating a life that feels balanced and nourished. It's often the end goal of freedom financially. And if you could see me, I'm putting in quotations, because I don't actually think you're ever financially free. I think you can be financially independent. But I think lying to yourself and saying that somehow money will make you free is completely and totally the wrong thing to do if that's where you're driving yourself. I think that financially we can be more comfortable, and science proves that up to $75,000, but I don't think that we can be financially free. And I think that having that as an end game is incredibly damaging. And I'll tell you why. So in 2015, as I said before, I started my network company and career, I guess you would call it, as an entrepreneur. And I did well. I hit one of their top ranks. I was, everyone's it girl, whatever that means. I was on stage speaking, and I realized after I had literally gained 35 kilos in 18 months and was tanking my marriage and was not sleeping at all, that somehow I needed to change my life. And I guess maybe I don't do things in halves, but I wanted to really decide, is this financial freedom and fame that everyone is telling me is going to bring me all of this goodness actually going to bring me the goodness that I want? And there are so many people that I coach with, and also people who message me who will say to me, I'm so burned out, I'm so overwhelmed, I want to coach, and they don't coach. And the reason why they don't coach with me, or they don't seek help for addictions which keep relapsing, or support for their marriages, is because so many of us are hitching our wagon to something outside of us that just actually doesn't matter. So I made some huge decisions. In the early 2017, I started a life coaching course with Beautiful You. I went and sought treatment for my eating disorder. After I felt like I was in a good spot with that, I hired a life coach, which I coached with for 2 rounds, and I've coached with more coaches. I had to ask myself some deep questions, which I'm going to ask you today. So hopefully you're in a space where you can listen. And the most important thing was I had to take full responsibility for my life. Now, I often talk about this with all of my coaching clients. That doesn't mean that it's negating abusive people or people who've done wrong things to you or situations that were really awful. But I had to take full responsibility of my life to say, I've created this monster. I've created this business. I've created it in a certain way where it's dependable on me completely. I've created a persona online. I've created this type of relationship currently with my husband. I need to stop being the victim in this situation and take full responsibility for my life. I truly believe that only when we choose to get in the arena and get our asses kicked, like Brene Brown talks about, I'm not interested in your feedback unless you're in the arena getting your ass kicked, is one of my favorite quotes, because if you're not going to get into the arena, then you either need to play the game that somebody else is telling you, or you're going to have to make some decisions about why you're choosing not to get into the arena and change your life. So what I see a lot in the entrepreneurship world, or just in general, women in general really, is either we play the victim card, that our life is too hard to change and I could never possibly change my life, it's too risky, or there's a glorification and an idolization of people outside of us who personify something which we don't even know if it's real or not. Like, there's no way that every single person online could know me 100% because I don't share every single morsel of my life with you. I try to share as much as possible with you. But I would never want someone to say, I want to be like Mish. I'd want someone to say, I'm encouraged by Mish's story, so I'm going to choose to get into the arena. That's what I would want. And I think when we start to idolize people that we don't actually know their true story, we can become enraptured with a very, very false sense of what we think we need. And so I had to make a decision as to how I was going to live my life, if I was going to step into the arena, how I was going to step into the arena, and how I was seriously going to change my whole entire relationship with my life. And these are some of the questions that I asked myself. Was I creating a life that felt free? Or was I creating a life where I felt chased? I think we have to understand that in order for us to be free, we have to be free in the moment. We're not free when we get $1 million or $2 million, that house or that husband or that baby or that job or that title or that suitcase. We are free now. We can choose to be free now and work towards certain milestones, but nothing that you ever acquiesce outside of yourself is ever going to give you true freedom, ever. The only sense of true freedom I've ever got is releasing any sort of attachment to external markers of success and my faith. Those are the only things that have ever brought me freedom, ever. And I had to ask myself, how do I want to feel in this journey? And how do I want to feel when I get to a certain marker? Like, how do I want to feel when I'm a life coach? How do I want to feel when I book my first public speaking event? How do I want to feel when I hit a certain rank or a certain job title, or when I have a new child? We focus so much on what we think that thing is going to give us once we get it. We forget to ask ourselves, how do we want to feel once we have it? Because I think that what we do is we think that when we get something that all of the feels are going to come when we get it, and that's not true. All the feels come with that lesson or that journey there. So once you get it, you need to figure out, how do you want to show up before you get that thing? How do you want to feel when you get it? Because I have had it when I've gotten something and I didn't realize that I actually would feel empty and tired and exhausted, and that's even worse. Because we think that once we get something, purchase something, do something, achieve something, that we're then going to be whole and free. And that's not true. It's absolutely not true. My next question that I had to ask myself was, what did I love about my life? So what was it that I absolutely loved about my life and I was uncompromising in? And what did I need to let go of? What did I value? All of those questions about what you love, what you need to let go of, and what you value are all boundary formation questions. And it is incredibly easy, especially as women, to continue to say yes all the time. To say yes to this, to say yes to that, to say yes, yes, yes. Oh, in a couple months' time, I'll have time for my husband or my kids or my holiday or for working out or eating healthy, etc. And of course, there are seasons for that. I am totally realistic in that. There are seasons when, you know what, takeaway is just going to have to work because you don't have a kitchen for 5 months like we just went through. And sometimes our marriages ebb and flow, and that's totally understandable. But I didn't even know what I loved about my life outside of work. I had no idea. And quite frankly, at the end, at the peak of all of this, I actually hated what I did. I loathed it. I was absolutely jaded towards it. I wanted to never speak about it or touch it ever again. And in that process, I had to make some big decisions about, if I'm going to learn how to let go and I'm going to learn how to create boundaries in my life, I had to calm my mind with the kind of perception of darkness and grief and letting go with things that I loved. I had to counterbalance it. I think that's why people have such a hard time creating boundaries, because the thought of saying no is so fear, shame, guilt, fear of missing out, comparisonitis inducing, that the only way to really calm your mind is to do meditation, yoga, kind of the traditional stuff. But I also argue sometimes even that is too much, that what we need to do is to counterbalance the weight like a teeter-totter, or as Australians call it, a seesaw. We can't just go from one swing pendulum to the other. We need to kind of counterbalance that swinging with good, with joy, with fun, with intention, with restoration, etc. And so if you're listening today and you say, Mish, I actually have no idea what I love. I can't remember the last thing that I love to do. I feel like everything I'm doing is just because. Then I would encourage you after this podcast to sit down and start to think about, well, when was a time when I really felt totally in sync with my life and I was having so much joy and it was really fun. And if you can't remember a time, that's completely fine. Start exploring the things that you've always wanted to do, or the things that you would kind of go, you know what, I actually would change plans to do that because that would be really, really cool. And for me, I love riding horse. I love it. I love being able to be home on a Friday night with my husband and watch football with him. I love being able to go for walks outside. So the things that I needed to figure out that I loved, I had to write those down to remind myself to go to them so that I wouldn't feel the gap of boundary formation with work. Because our mind wants to create as least amount of tension as possible. And when we start to create boundaries, or we start to let go of relationships or things, or we start to say no for the first time, or we start to look at our values and go, actually, the things that I truly value don't actually align with what I'm doing, or the person that I'm partnered with, or the relationship with my parents, or the relationship with the friends that I have, that creates a lot of anxiety in our minds because it can create a lot of pain. So the best way that I try to coach with is not only the tools of meditation, yoga, journaling, etc., prayer, is also to counterbalance it with joy and fun, because it helps our minds calm down. And I also had to really think about, how was I going to be courageous? And if it wasn't necessarily for me, I had to be courageous for my daughter. I had to show her that you can make change, and that you can say no, and that you can toe hard lines, and that you can have boundaries, and that just because one thing was one thing and that people think that it has to be a lifetime commitment doesn't mean that it has to be a lifetime commitment for you. You have the ability and the freedom to change. I also had to look at every aspect of my business. What part of my business was I willing to maintain? What part of my business was I not willing to maintain? How could I bring in help? Like I hired a virtual assistant, which has been amazing. I've had different coaches. Some coaches I loved, some coaches were okay. I've had different business coaches. I really had to look at and I'm still looking at every aspect of my business and going, do I want it? Do I not want it? Is it worth the financial investment or not? Is it worth the time investment or not? Is it worth the mental energy investment or not? What type of coaching clients do I want to coach with? Am I willing to coach with somebody who in my gut may not be a good fit? So those are the type of things that you have to really look at as to what is working in your business and what needs to change. And I think one of the things I have had to ask myself, especially my business, is how do I create more sustainability? How do I make this more sustainable, more focused, more aligned, more clear? And all of those type of things are things that you have to also discern as well. And some really big questions I had to ask myself in my own internalization was, what areas of my life could I release comparison? How is comparison costing me? And how could I add more self-compassion into my life? So one of the areas that I talk about a lot with my coaching clients is this idea of self-compassion. So self-compassion is different than self-love or self-trust or even self-care, especially self-care. And that self-compassion is the ability for you to speak to yourself in a compassionate, caring, and enduring way. So oftentimes we will go for a massage or for a facial and we call that self-care, but we're still running the inner dialogue, the inner critic, all of those type of really negative thought patterns. I think one of the things about self-compassion is that no longer do we hitch our wagons, as I say, to shame and guilt and punishment. We start to take each situation, even if we're reacting emotionally or we maybe didn't react the way that we wanted to, or we had a boundary that we didn't keep clear, or something happened in our marriage where you didn't show up the way that you wanted to. It's not about punishing yourself or trying to hustle it out or try to work it out or try to brush under the rug or try to blame other people or go back into our victim cycle. We really have the ability in that moment to compassionately explore, okay, so what was the trigger? What was I wanting? Do I need to seek forgiveness? Do I need to offer forgiveness? Do I need to offer an apology? How can I be more clear about what the expectations are of what I need in that situation? And how can I release any sort of guilt or shame that's keeping me attached to the situation? Self-compassion is about being gentle and explorative and reflective and honest and compassionate to ourselves and others. This doesn't negate bad behavior. It doesn't negate abusive behavior. But what it does mean is that if you're still engaging in perhaps behavior that isn't 100% great for you, it's not about shaming yourself anymore. It's about saying, okay, so what was the trigger for that? So for an example, is that for the first 2 weeks I was here in America, and I could see myself kind of slipping back into old food patterns. And I could see myself, eating sugar, and which is fine, sugar is fine, but it just wasn't, I was just eating so much of it. And I felt like I was starting to binge eat again and thought, okay, there was 2 ways I could think about this. I could punish myself and tell myself that I was a horrible person. Every time I come home, I always do this. It's always such a mess. You're going to gain a ton of weight. You're such a failure. You've had weight loss surgery and now you're doing this old pattern again. Or I could say, so what do you really need? And when we ask the question, what do we really need? Or what was it that I needed? Or what was it that I actually wanted? We become so much more powerful in our journeys of balance and reducing hustle and find alignment than if we try to outwork, outfunction, outdiet, out fame, etc. And it is such a powerful question to ask yourself of, so what was it that I actually wanted? And as you continue on this healing journey for yourself, or you've got other people around you, you can start to think about, so what was it that I really wanted? It's often like when I have my 4-year-old who is crying or having a meltdown, I'm like, okay, Ainsley, what is it that you really want from me right now that you're not getting? And usually it's comfort, or it's a nap, or she's hungry, or she's scared. So being able to ask your children, so what is it that you really need from me right now that I'm not giving you? Or what is it that you really need in this situation? Is a really good way for you to start, if the idea of self-compassion feels foreign to you, giving it to other people so that you can start understanding what it feels like to give it to other people so you can start giving it to yourself. And if you feel like you're not worthy of self-compassion, then it would be a really good time for you to look at doing life coaching or working with a psychologist. Because in my personal opinion, until we really understand and are able to conceptualize this idea of self-compassion, a lot of the stuff that I've talked about before doesn't stick as well. I feel like self-compassion is one of the most important aspects of recovery when it comes to workaholism and hustling, because oftentimes we're doing it because we're trying to run from something. So that's just a little bit about my story. It's about my life, about what I've learned really. I'm a work in progress. I'm nowhere near done. But I hope that this conversation around reducing hustle and finding your true alignment helps serve you today. And I hope that it really helps you to start kicking up some dust in your own life so that you can really become as aligned and authentic and boundaried as you need. Until next time, everybody, I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for joining me today. If you'd like more information about myself, my journey, my public speaking engagements, or life coaching with me, please head to my website, mishpope.com. If you can kindly leave me a beautiful review on iTunes, I would be forever grateful. I can't wait to connect again in the next episode.